All right, so welcome to our presentation on fulfillment and purpose with Kabbalah. For those of you who I haven't met in person, my name is Jordan Bain. I'm a certified international Kabbalah instructor with the Modern Mystery School. And tonight we're going to talk about the understanding of Kabbalah from this perspective of how it works with our life purpose, how it helps us with wholeness, healing, and fulfillment in our lives. And there's many aspects to this, but in this presentation, I hope to give a sense of this and an overview. And then at the end, depending on how much time we have, we'll do a brief meditation to give some experiential taste of the energy of the tree of life and what we work with in the mystery school. So there's many things that when I was working with the energy of what wants to be communicated at this time about Kabbalah in context of the class that's coming up and what we're teaching in the mystery school right now, there's different key understandings about how Kabbalah assists us in our lives. And one of these key understandings is that Kabbalah is really, while it is a system for many things, it's for everyone to use to heal, because it is a truly universal system that brings us on an alchemical journey on a soul level toward a greater sense of fulfillment, a greater sense of wholeness, and a greater completion. This map here that you see on the left-hand side of the screen is a map of what we call the tree of life in the mystery school. And this is depicted throughout history in many different ways. And something that might be helpful context here for those who have studied in Jewish Kabbalah is that the mystery school and Jewish Kabbalah have a huge overlap and also a huge divergence. So approximately 3,000 years ago, a little bit less than 3,000 years ago, our mystery school was put into its current format by King Solomon. Now, King Solomon is, of course, a Jewish king in the Bible, one of the more famous kings of history. And there's many stories about his life, which we're not going to go into here. But one of the things that King Solomon did, according to mystery school tradition, was to create the mystery school as it exists today, and to bring together all these different tribes from all over the world to both for many decades of their lives, for his whole adult working life, to test what would be a universal system that would work for all people, all religions, all belief systems, all races, men and women. It didn't matter what language you spoke. And to create this universal system, all these different hundreds of thousands of representatives came from all over the world, which is very hard to imagine even now. To host a convention with hundreds of thousands of people that lasts for 30 years, you need an entire city for that. So King Solomon built a whole city for that, actually in northern Egypt, near what is now Alexandria, and worked there like a research temple for 30 years. This temple was in parallel to the temple in Jerusalem at the time. And as they worked for those 30 years to create the mystery school system that we have today, one of the things that they put into its current format, the way that we teach it today in the mystery school, is the system of Kabbalah or Kabbalah. And that was one of the crown jewels and the pieces of what King Solomon felt was truly essential in what he was seeking to create at that time, which was this system to bring about an energetic state within humans, sometimes called the Adam Kadmon. And that concept, which you'll bump into if you study Jewish Kabbalah and philosophy, is this concept that a human in a physical body can be fully God realized to the greatest degree possible. And this state of being is actually real. It's something that can be attained, but we need a lot of help to get there. So King Solomon wanted a reliable and reproducible system that would allow for anyone who engaged with that system to attain that state of consciousness. Now, of course, it doesn't get attained in 1 year or even 1 decade, but he said we need this system on the planet. We need to be able to have a way to, while we are still alive, live as our divine selves, fully in the physical body. And that was a really radical statement even for his time, and it's kind of no less radical a statement for our time now. And they really did succeed in creating the system in his time. And of course, after his passing, Jewish patriarchs sort of took back over Jewish religion. And at that time, for about 1,000 years, a Jewish Kabbalah and Mystery School Kabbalah were taught in parallel, side by side, pretty much the same teachings. And then about 2,000 years ago, Jewish Kabbalah shifted course into about 1,000 years of what was called Merkaba mysticism. And then about 900 years ago, Jewish Kabbalah shifted once again into a more philosophical exploration that to this day has sort of continued on down in a tradition and is now taught to people who also are not Jewish through the Kabbalah centers, which are authorized to do that. So Jewish Kabbalah as it's taught today is actually very, very different than Mystery School Kabbalah because we're still teaching it the way that Solomon created it as part of the Mystery School lineage. So the Mystery School lineage sort of went underground and continued in secret after King Solomon's death. Jewish religion continued on as religion. And even though there was a lot of overlap and parallel, most of the Jewish patriarchs at that time really rejected a lot of the work that Solomon did because they said, well, he worshipped other gods. He brought in these other systems. He brought forward these other ways of doing things that were not really Jewish at all. So there was a lot of rejection of what Solomon had created. Even though there's a lot of embracing of what he did in terms of building the temple and unifying, the Jewish people, there was also a big sort of rejection of what he did and the endeavors of the mystery school at that time after he died. So that is a little bit of history on the mystery schools, or on our mystery school, the lineage of Solomon specifically. There are other schools on the planet that are not the lineage of Solomon. So Kabbalah was the system that they had for turning on the blueprint. Kabbalah is truly the blueprint. And when we turn on that blueprint, it teaches us from the inside out. It shows us who we are from the inside out. And it does so without us even truly needing to understand it or study it. Study of it is helpful. Study of it is useful. But a lot of people, for your question earlier, Chelsea, about time commitment with this, a lot of people get a little bit concerned when they're like, well, I'm going to study for 10 months the mind of God in myself. I'm going to study my spiritual DNA and my blueprints. There's certainly a lot there to study. I don't know if I'm going to have time to study all that, which is a very valid thought and question. And the way that we do Kabbalah in the mystery school is we essentially initiate you or ascend you, we call it an ascension process, directly into each of the 10 spheres of the tree of life. And we start you with the sphere called Malkuth at the feet, which is the numerology of 10 in this diagram here. If you see this sphere number 10 at the bottom of the tree, that is the physical world, and that is where we live as human beings. So we start you on the ascension journey in the physical world where you already live. And then we take you up through the other 9 spheres or emanations of the tree of life. And we go through what's sometimes called the personality here in Yesod, number 9, Hod, number 8, and Netzach, number 7. We go through sometimes what's called the higher parts of the soul in Tiferet, number 6, Gabra, number 5, and Hesed, number 4. Then we cross what's called the bridge of Da'at, the bridge of hidden knowledge that's here, that is not represented in this diagram. Some diagrams do represent it, but it's not a sphere on the tree. It's a placeholder and a transition point, also called the eye of the needle. And then finally, we ascend you at the final retreat weekend into Bina, number 3, Chokmah, number 2, and Keter, number 1, the crown. And that completes the journey over those 10 months. So we do that over the course of 4 weekends, and the tree becomes alive as you do that. So as we light up the tree through these ascensions or these initiation experiences, essentially, the tree starts to teach you from the inside out what is within you. And the tree has a perfection to it that's very difficult to believe or grasp. And it still really blows me away how the perfection of the tree of life is possible. It's truly not a system designed by humans. It's designed, the mythology, both within the Jewish tradition and also within the mystery school tradition of the tree of life, is that God, Goddess, Mother, Father, God, Elohim, which is a Hebrew word that essentially means divine masculine and feminine, creator, God, goddess in divine union. God, goddess, Elohim created the system of Kabbalah in the Garden of Eden while humans were still there, and gave that system to the angels so that they could understand how to address the needs of humans and how to address the will of God. From that state in the Garden of Eden, when humans came down to the physical world and put on clothes or put on physical bodies and came out of the Garden of Eden into density, we came into Malkuth, into the physical density. The angels essentially took pity on humans and said they're going to need a system to come home, and so we'll teach them Kabbalah. So the first humans who were on earth received Kabbalah from the angels of the garden, who essentially said they're going to need this pathway. They're going to need the map to get home to themselves, because otherwise they'll be lost in the physical world. So when we look at the tree of life and we look at this diagram, we're talking here about a complete and perfect alchemy of the human self being transformed into the divine self, going to a higher order, a higher harmony, a higher way of being. And here we're defining healing as becoming whole, reclaiming who you really are, your true self as an eternal being, as spirit, as God, goddess, your true individuality, and your true power. In order to have true power in our lives, we have to take full responsibility for ourselves. And Kabbalah shows us, what does that mean and how do you do that? And when I first started taking Kabbalah in the mystery school, one of my very first teachers in the school had this thing that she said all the time, and I didn't like it and I didn't understand it. And she said, Kabbalah is all about telling yourself the truth. And I was like, of course, I tell myself the truth like all the time. I'm so truthful with myself. Like, I'm so humble about it too, because I'm so truthful. And of course, I had no idea what I was talking about, because I found out many truths about myself every time I did Kabbalah every year. And I continued finding out more and more truths about myself. And some of those truths were wonderful, beautiful, divine truths. And other of those truths were very difficult or challenging to face within myself. Some of those truths were old traumas that I didn't know that I had. Some of those truths were divine gifts that were so wonderful and amazing. Some of those truths were, this relationship is working and that relationship is not working. Some of those truths were, here's how you need to go create a whole new career for yourself and do this, or you need to work this corporate job that you never wanted to work, or what. I mean, I've been doing Kabbalah now for 17 years in the mystery school, and it's been the creation process for all the aspects of my life since I began. And it really leaves no stone unturned in terms of bringing at the right time in the right way. And it never gives you more than you can handle. But it puts the responsibility for all creation on your plate and on your at your fingertips, and shows you truly how responsible you are for the inner experiences of your own life. The things that happen inside of us are the things that happen outside of us, without any sort of new age philosophies of blame involved. You know, there's so much that can get tied up with concepts of like, well, if I'm the creator of my life, you know, why did my dad beat me when I was 5? Did I create that? Right? And the deep existential misunderstandings of this concept of personal responsibility are hard to address in a webinar. They're hard to address even one-on-one, like soul to soul, but maybe it's helpful to think of in terms of our responsibility. You're only responsible for the things that you have power over to choose, and everything within yourself, you have power to choose how you experience it. If you were abused as a child, for example, that's not your responsibility that you were abused. That's not your contract with God that you were abused. It's not that it was meant to be or anything like that. If you have a philosophy that says that it was meant to be, I'm not here to shake your branches of that tree and tell you you're wrong. That's not what I mean. I just mean that from a mystery school teaching perspective, there's no blame in this understanding of responsibility. Like, we take responsibility for ourselves fully, and that means empowerment. We're not trying to go retroactively into the situations of the past and apply a philosophy that we then use to blame or shame ourselves or anybody else. So hopefully that's helpful. in understanding that, because that can be a real sticking point in the consciousness of people who have experienced abuse, trauma, or pain, as to why, taking responsibility is something that can seem quite scary. Because if I were to take responsibility for me now, does that then mean I need to take responsibility for my pain or trauma in the past? And that can cause an existential crisis if we think about it like that. So mystery school is not heavy on philosophy at all. The mystery school is not a philosophical system. The mystery school is an experiential system of healing, and Kabbalah is really no different. Kabbalah gives us lenses and windows to look into our lives, and it does not force a conclusion as to what we should see through those lenses and windows. It just gives us options. It gives us a way of looking at ourselves multidimensionally, and it invites us to ask a new set of questions. That invitation to those new questions hopefully will open new doors within us, and we can free ourselves and heal as we go through those doors. Another key understanding here for Kabbalah is that Kabbalah makes a better and more accomplished version of life possible. This is very related to this understanding of fulfillment as well as purpose. Kabbalah does this in many ways. First and foremost, it organizes our mind on all levels. Kabbalah comes into your experience as soon as you begin the tree, like the moment you complete that first weekend that we're starting in this September. Kabbalah usually starts in September. And it's, speaking of Jewish tradition, it seems like almost every year I end up starting it on Rosh Hashanah. I'm not Jewish. I was not raised Jewish. But like without fail, I seem to pick the Rosh Hashanah weekend. So with all respect to the Jewish tradition and those who are observing that, Rosh Hashanah means head of the year. And the Kabbalah is an amazing way to start the head of the year, to have that head of the year. So the organization that takes place within us through Kabbalah takes place on all levels. So there's the daily functioning level, the subconscious level, there's the mind of God level. And each of these different spheres in this map here of the tree of life are all of those things and more. So when we talk about Malkuth, the kingdom, the physical world, there's many levels to that. There's a mundane level, which is really just about our physical life, like being healthy, eating good food, having a good home, living in a good way physically that supports you and nurtures you and helps you to move forward physically with your health and your organized life, and having an organized home, and relating with nature in a good way, in a positive way, relating with elemental energies and spiritual forces that are connected to Mother Gaia, to the earth. All those things are sort of mundane connections of Malkuth. But there are other connections of Malkuth as well. So Malkuth helps us, just like all the spheres of the tree help us in different ways psychologically. Malkuth helps us to overcome a lot of inertia in our lives, places where we're feeling like things either are on the same track and they just keep moving on the same track, or they're stuck and they're not moving at all. Kabbalah helps us to start to move energy through, as we do that ascension into Malkuth the first weekend, to move energy through that physical world, that physical life. And it moves energy through the psyche surrounding discernment and inertia. So if we want to get out of inertia in our lives, Kabbalah says, well, we need to develop discernment. And discernment, sometimes in different Kabbalistic texts called discrimination, doesn't mean discrimination like we need a diversity, equity, and inclusion training. It means that we are discerning or discriminating, telling the difference between things and saying what is really right for us. So I discern that chocolate cake is not good for my health. Maybe I'm not going to have it tonight. I discern that when everything is disorganized in my home, it's harder to function, because these are all correspondences of Malkuth, the physical body, the physical life. I'm going to clean that up. I discern that the job that I'm working in, I need to ask for a raise because I'm not being paid what I'm worth. I discern that the way I communicate with my kids, I need to take a lot more responsibility for my emotions and not blame it on them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So discernment, just like anything in Malkuth, could be about any other level of the tree, because Malkuth is also where all other levels of the tree manifest in the physical life. So if you notice the numerology here, The numerology starts up at the top of the tree of life with the crown, number 1, and it flows down the tree of life in what's called the path of the lightning flash or the flaming sword. And if you follow that again, as I draw it on the screen here, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, this creates a zigzag effect down and across through the tree of life, which is sometimes why it's called the path of the lightning flash or the path of the flaming sword. All these other 9 levels essentially deposit their energies one after the next into each other. And then finally they come to Yesod, the foundation, and all the energies of the other 9 spheres of the tree come down and manifest here in Malkuth. So Malkuth can be the repository for every other area of the tree of life. And that's also why we start there, because it gives you a summary of everything that's going on inside of you in like an introductory way, and gives you the opportunity to begin to move the energy around that and to create a shift. At the same time as the physical levels going on, the psychological levels going on, there's many other things happening, but there's the mind of God level going on. And the mind of God within the tree of life is the very fire of the life force energy, sometimes called the Kundalini energy, or the sexual creative life force of God. That energy flows through Malkuth, through the angelic forces in Malkuth, and energizes everything in our lives. So we become more alive when we ascend into Malkuth, because the Kundalini is gently, lovingly, slowly, and safely waking up and flowing through all the cells of our body and revitalizing us. So all of these levels of the tree of life, and these are just examples of Malkuth, the first Sephira that we ascend into, which is number 10. The numerology here is 10. All these are examples of how Kabbalah operates on all these levels at the same time. And everything that corresponds with each of these levels of the tree of life is going on in them all at the same time. But we're going to spend 1 month focused on each of them. And during that month, you really get to clean house in that area of your subconscious and your mind of God. You get to make choices about what goes in there and what stays in there. Kabbalah is going to help you cleanse pain, trauma, hurt, blockage, old emotions, old limiting beliefs, programming, masks, old identity, failures, mistakes, and more. And through the requests that you actually place into the tree of life during Kabbalah, it gives you a whole renewed sense of faith in yourself, because you start creating and changing those things in your own blueprint. Kabbalah allows you to actually influence your own blueprint for the highest good in the most perfect way, and to renew your entire blueprint and your sense of connection with yourself, humanity, God, and your higher purpose. So I'll take questions here so far. You can just unmute yourself and ask any questions that come to mind, because it's a lot of information. Any questions so far? Okay, great. We'll move on. So as Kabbalists, our ultimate goal is to know ourselves. As Kabbalists, we want to live more of our life in a more alive state. The mysterious forces behind life through Kabbalah are opened up, revealed, influenced, and activated, and bring you more of your life so that you can experience the fullness of the lessons, all the aspects of what's going on in your life, all parts of your relationships, and embrace all of it. As you embrace more of your life, you learn things that you weren't learning before. You learn what needs to be learned. You learn what you need to let go of, and you learn what is necessary to expand into a new way of being. Kabbalah is also our best tool for manifestation. It gives you manifestations that are better than what you were able to have dreamed of before. I see this again and again in Kabbalah, that somebody asks for something, they actually get something even better than what they asked for, that they didn't really have as a possibility in their mind. It was beyond what they thought was possible. The things you thought you couldn't have, the things that you thought might take you decades to achieve, can often be realized in a short period of time in a better form. And we see this year after year. People give testimonials and share at the final retreat weekend when everything is done, when we've done the final ceremony and we're having like our celebration dinner at the end of the 10 months. people often say, they're like, I didn't think I was actually going to manifest most of the things that I asked for, and I manifested all of them and more. And I thought it was going to take me 10 years to do that, but I did it all in 10 months. So Kabbalah is a very, very powerful system for supercharging specific aspirations and goals, refining the blueprints of your DNA to become the correct frequency. And then as you become the frequency, it automatically manifests in your life. Really how to actually bring in the things in your life that you want and need. And we might have huge resistance to that. Not everybody manifests everything they ask for in Kabbalah. Some people manifest many different lessons. Some people manifest everything that they ask for. Everybody is different in their inner state of resistance to what they say they want. Some people might say, I really want an amazing divine union relationship. And then they go through Kabbalah and they absolutely manifest it. The next person right next to them in class, who maybe on the surface seems like a kind of similar person, they ask for a divine union relationship and they get a year's worth of lessons that help them get ready for that divine union relationship, but it doesn't mean it's manifested in their life. And that same person who asked for it and did and got a lot of lessons around it may have a lot of insights as to why they weren't actually ready for it. And in fact, anytime I've ever seen that happen, that is what happens. The person who is asking for something who doesn't manifest it really is taken through their DNA blueprints to discover, well, why am I stopping myself and where am I stopping myself? And sometimes even, am I asking for something that I don't even really want? Like, it sounds like I should want it. I think I should want it. My personality says I should want it, but I don't actually want or need it in my life. And so then the tree of life takes that and it redirects it towards something even better. Danielle, I see you raising your hand. Do you want to ask a question here?
Yes, thank you. This statement, the Kabbalah refines the blueprints of your DNA to become the correct frequency, sounds very confusing to me. Can you elaborate? What does that mean, refining the blueprints of your DNA?
So the DNA is the tree of life. The tree here, literally, if you look at it from above or from, I think, a sort of a more three-dimensional angle, right now we're looking at it two-dimensionally, and you simply spin it on its central axis, it literally is like one codon of the DNA. It's like 3 base pairs of DNA. So this is the sacred geometric spiritual blueprint behind the physical DNA. And when we bring light into the tree, it holographically affects every codon of our DNA. So DNA, there's a lot of research on epigenetics now and understanding how emotions and biophotons and light actually influence the DNA and change, not exactly like the proteins that are coded for in the DNA, although sometimes, but more what's called epigenetically, the DNA can change and is coded with information that is not really understood, but is speculated to be related to what are called biophotons by science right now. And that DNA is the best carrier. And this is actually from military research, which is kind of interesting. DNA is the best carrier in the body for biophotons. And biophotons carry an enormous amount of energy that scientists don't really understand it yet. Metaphysically, we've been harnessing it in the mystery schools for thousands of years, but with the systems like Kabbalah, life activation, initiation, pretty much everything on the initiatory path is working with this. So epigenetically, our DNA changes and carries different codes, emotions, and memories within it. And those memories, this is most easily documented through ancestral memories. Like there's, for example, very interesting research. And if you're interested, I can give you a link to a book that has sort of a very cool compilation of this for healing purposes, compilation of studies, of research studies about epigenetics, DNA, biophotons, etc. Not related to the mystery school, but related to ancestral healing. So in a certain study that was performed recently, a lot of this research has been in the last 15 years. Mice were triggered, associated with certain smells. And those triggers were different for different mice. But the most notable was that one generation of mice was exposed to a synthetic smell that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth. That's sort of like a synthetic florally smell. And when they were exposed to this smell, they wanted to make sure it was nowhere in their genetic memories. The smell was not anywhere in the DNA memories of these mice epigenetically. So they created a novel smell that's never existed before, and they exposed this generation of mice to this smell. And at the same time, they gave them a almost life-threatening but not life-ending electric shock. This is horrible research on one level, but it demonstrates something. I'm not suggesting anyone go reproduce this research, but nor do I like the cruelty to animals that's involved in this research, but it's a very fascinating result. Up to 4 generations later, the offspring of those mice who never were exposed to an electric shock would recoil as though they were being shocked 4 generations later when they were exposed to that smell. And they had never come in contact with or seen, like these mice were conceived after their parents had been exposed to this. So something somehow is being, and those mice did not have measurable genetic changes, but they did have epigenetic changes. So somehow our DNA blueprints are responding to emotional, physical, electrochemical stimuli and passing that down epigenetically to our ancestors, to our offspring. So things that happened to your ancestors 3 or 4 generations ago, you're still experiencing those things, which asks a major question of who am I? You know, if I'm going through stuff my ancestors went through 100 years ago, who am I? If my aspirations and goals in my life aren't maybe even my own fully, whose are they? So one of the reasons we have the mystery school, one of the reasons we have Kabbalah is to be able to refine and individualize and live our specific genetic blueprints. So it is very hard, maybe, regardless of a person's level of exposure to or understanding of science, one way or the other, because someone could understand science very well and be like, that's nonsense. Epigenetics is just, a quack field of study that, even though everyone has their hands in it, including the US military, is, it's inconclusive. So we really shouldn't really say much about that. And that's okay. That's a perspective, that's an opinion. Or someone else could be really steeped in science and be like, oh my God, this makes so much sense to me intellectually. Kind of doesn't really matter either way when it comes to the mystery school, because the mystery school isn't a philosophy that requires that anybody believes it. It simply works no matter what. So you take Kabbalah and you don't have to understand epigenetic science and research studies that were published on mice and ancestral trauma or any of that. The DNA simply starts to get rewritten, spiritually speaking, according to what you say that you really want in your life. And it does it hand in hand with the mind of God, because the tree of life plugs you into the mind of God because it is the mind of God. And it also is your mind. It is a holographic point of union between all levels of mind. So the mind of the quantum field, of a single particle in the quantum field, the map of it is the tree of life. The tree of life is the map of the spiritual DNA. The tree of life is the map of the human subconsciousness. The tree of life is the map of all the worlds you visit in your dreams. The tree of life is all of the repositories of all the virtues and vices of your character. The tree of life is all of your divine gifts and abilities. The tree of life is every way that the mind of God operates to flow all energies through the universe on all levels and dimensions. So in Kabbalah, we say that everything that exists inside the tree of life, and everything that does not exist exists outside the tree of life, which is a statement that then could take 20 years to unpack. So I'm not going to try and unpack that statement, but all things that exist in the world of reality exist inside the tree, and everything that has unreality exists outside of the tree. So I hope that answers your question and opens up about 500 more, but is there a follow-on to that I could clarify further?
Yeah, just can you expound on what you mean by the mind of God?
Well, in terms of the Hermetic principles, all is mind. So, as mystery school initiates, we know there's 4 levels of God, and those are just ways of talking because all things are God. So if we talk about the mind of God, we're going to be talking about all of those levels, which is how, and then we talk about mind, the first Hermetic principle is mentalism, is that all things are unfolded from the mind of the all, or oneness, or source, or Ein Sof, which is the first level of God, and probably the easiest one to talk about because it doesn't challenge really anybody's belief systems. So, and my goal in this webinar tonight is, I'm not here teaching Empower Thyself. I'm not here expanding the box of belief systems. This is not that's something that can only be done in person, right? So I'm just giving information. I'm not here to push up against the boundaries of opinion, right? Although this presentation may do that, it's not the goal of this presentation. Whereas in mystery school initiation, an essential aspect is that we challenge the boundaries of opinion so that a person can ask themselves brand new questions about their life, not so that we have the answers and not so that they have the answers either, but so that they can live more in the space of the questions instead of living according to the programs of the past, right? So if we talk about God as source, we talk about God as the substrate of the quantum field. If we talk about God as somehow having a will that is both knowable and unknowable at the same time, Kabbalistically speaking, we say that is the primal will to good, that the will of God, both Kabbalistically and Hermetically speaking, the mystery school being a Hermetic tradition above all other traditions, the will of God is good. And in fact, that is a tautological statement that it is only good. And God is defined by that. So the will of God is never evil. The will of God is only good. So again, that's one of those statements that, hermetically speaking, you can unpack for 20 years and discuss, well, what does it mean that the will of God is only good? How is that then a definition of God? And that gets into really, 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 really big, long discussions. But most importantly, again, the mystery school is not a school of philosophy or a school of religion. The mystery school is a school of having your own experience with it. So when we say the mind of God, how are we going to experience the mind of God as individual humans, right? If there's a wonderful line that I love so much from a text from ancient India called the Bhagavad Gita that says, if 100,000 suns, like the sun in the sky, were to rise in the sky all at the same time, which is unimaginably bright, right? Our whole solar system would be destroyed, right? That would hardly begin to compare to the glory of God. And if we think of God, using the second principle of Hermetics, which is the principle of correspondence, which states as above, so below, as below, so above, as within, so without, as without, so within. If we think with correspondence, okay, so if 100,000 suns rose in the sky, and that doesn't even begin to compare to the glory of God, what is God? And who am I in relationship to that? Because we teach in the mystery school that you also are, at the very least, a God in training. How is that possible? You're like, I have trouble tying my shoes sometimes in the morning, or, I run late for work sometimes, or I feel tired because I had to get up with my kids at 5 a.m. How is it that I possibly have any part of God within me? Because God seems like such a far away, perfect, infinite, eternal concept. And I'm here in a very limited physical human body. There's that joking statement that nobody gets out of here alive, because if you're born, you're going to die. And it's very obvious that the physical body is not God. So the physical body is the obvious part of our life, but the very subtlest, not obvious part of our life is the God self, is who we are as spirits. And who we are as spirit, that part of us is also, for most people, seemingly very far away. So we say something in a presentation like this, like the mind of God, and of course, the human mind tries to grasp, like, well, what could that mean? What does that mean that we say this blueprint here is the mind of God? How is that related to me? And one of the main purposes of Kabbalah is discovering that for ourselves. How is it that these 10 emanations of the mind of God are also emanations of my mind? Where is the connection point and relationship point between the mind of God and my mind? What does that even mean? And those questions don't really become answerable until you finish the tree of life, until you finish the 10 months, until you cross the abyss, which is this invisible separating line here between Gevurah Hesed and Bina and Hokmah on the tree of life. There's an invisible space here that's called the great abyss. And in the abyss goes all unreality, all mental insanity, everything that does not exist goes into the abyss. And this is not a something that we really go experience directly in Kabbalah, but it's something that we have to cross over. We don't take you into the abyss in Kabbalah, we take you over it, and you build a bridge over it. The abyss represents everything that keeps you separate from that understanding of yourself as God. So through Kabbalah, you develop through the first 7 spheres, the first really 3/4 of the tree of life, the first 3/4 of the year of the tree of life, you develop the strength, the discernment, the clarity, the truth, the victory over negativity, the understanding of your own inner beauty, your own inner child, your strength of foundation in your subconsciousness, your ability to learn when to say yes and when to say no to the things that do and don't serve you in life. You really develop the strength of character and beingness within you to face and overcome whatever is inside of your abyss personally, whatever keeps you separate from your own experience of your God self in your life. So in Kabbalah, we don't give you the answer and say, this is what the mind of God is. We say, you're going to have your own experience with the mind of God. That experience is going to be really radically unique and different for each person. And the tree of life is that blueprint, which will show you what is that unique relationship for you? In what way are you part of the mind of God? And in what way is the mind of God part of you? So hopefully that's helpful in that. So Kabbalah, there's another really important concept here. Kabbalah really reveals the next steps of your life. And I highlighted next steps here, all in caps, because within each of us, there is a greater work that is waiting. And this work scares everybody. Without a map and a guide and a system, most people will naturally and automatically avoid or block their own next steps of life. Now, many of us are taking next steps all the time in the regular world. What I'm talking about here and why I'm capitalizing this concept of next steps, the next steps here are the steps that are the hardest ones to take. These are the steps that we would mostly rather stay comfortably stuck in the familiar world until we've long outgrown that world and it's causing us serious pain. Because these next steps that I'm talking about here are the ones that our light and our power when we take those steps scares us. And so usually we beat around the bush for decades and we don't take those next steps. And then if we're lucky, often something will push us in our life to finally take those next steps. And they're the hardest ones to do, but they're the most worthwhile. We get the most out of life when we take those next steps. So Kabbalah reveals for you uniquely and individually, what are those next steps that have always scared you? And how do you develop the inner strength to actually take those steps? Because when you do take those steps, your life will be much more fulfilling and your life will have a much greater purpose to it. Kabbalah takes you all the way to the absolute existence of your own God self. This is like, for most people, they experience it like a silent mirror of eternity. And your creative limitations, as you go through different levels of the tree of life, are reduced and eventually removed through a combination of Kabbalah, the path of initiation itself, and then healing sessions that go along with this in the mystery school that are part of the King Solomon healing modalities, etheric reconstruction, and other essential aspects of what King Solomon designed to create that Adam Kadmon state, that divine human state within the physical body of a human being, with the physical life of a human being. So Kabbalah brings us to that mirror of eternity and brings us out of the programmed self into the unlimited self. Of course, that involves those next steps. And of course, that scares us because the unlimited self is free and can do anything. So we'll talk about that as well. Kabbalah helps you to ask the most fundamental questions, which everything else depends on. Kabbalah gives you the master keys to unlock all those answers within. And Kabbalah sometimes is literally translated as mouth to ear, which implies communication, listening, and reception of wisdom from the higher mind within you to the lower mind. The fundamental questions we call the 5 questions. And if we don't ask these, we don't get oriented correctly to ourselves. So as Kabbalists, we take these questions very seriously, even though they're questions that we all asked ourselves growing up as children. So the first question is, who am I? And you could put, for all of this, if it's helpful in understanding, you could put the words in eternity at the end of that question. So who am I in eternity? What am I in eternity? Where do I come from in eternity? Where am I going in eternity? What is my purpose in life in eternity? Because I was texting with someone about a week ago and he was like, well, who am I? I'm blah, 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 blah. What am I? I do this for a living. Where do I come from? I come from West Virginia. Where am I going? I'm not sure. What is my purpose in life? Make a lot of money and die, right? So those aren't the kinds of answers that we're looking for when we ask these questions. We're looking for, who am I as an eternal being? The part of me that's never been born and is never going to die, who am I? Because, yeah, I'm Jordan Bain. I'm from Boston. What am I? I teach Kabbalah. Where do I come from? Boston. Where am I going? Well, I hope to retire in Phoenix, Arizona, in 30 years or whatever. What is my purpose in life? Raise my family. That's not my purpose in life. My purpose in life, in eternity, is much bigger than that. And so as Kabbalists, we ask these questions on a regular basis. And you might be saying to yourself, well, that's really nice. Who cares? I already know the mundane answers, like what you're talking about, Jordan. But the eternal answers, like, I'll just figure that out after I die, right? Like, why do I need to know now as a human, who am I in eternity? What bearing does that have on my life? And that's not easily answered question, because one of the reasons I put this map here of the cube of space, the cube of the soul, is that that's not an easily figured out map, but yet that's your inner compass that's going all the time with these 5 questions. And who you are oriented to, are you oriented to your human self? In which case you're not really oriented to the cube of space and what's going on in your soul. You're oriented to the physical mundane world, which is where you've always been oriented, and that's fine. But as initiates and Kabbalists, we're not here to just live a mundane life. We're here to live an exceptional life of deep fulfillment. And there's an esoteric science to doing that. And that science starts with these 5 questions. The science starts with these 5 questions. I was talking with someone on the phone today, and she was like, well, why is the mystery school system structured? Why can't I just get it all with my intuition? And she's been on a spiritual path for 40 years. And I was like, well, you tell me. There's reasons why, like, we do certain things in the mystery school. There's reasons why we ask these 5 questions. You could ask these 5 questions for several years, and after you do it for 5 years, you're like, oh my God, this is why we ask the 5 questions. And there's a lot of stuff in the mystery school like that. There's a lot of stuff in the mystery school like that, where you do it for a while, and as you're going through it, your life goes through many, many changes. And then 5 or 10 years later, you look back and you're like, oh, now I understand why I did those things at that time. But if someone hadn't pushed me and said, this is the thing to study now, I wouldn't have done that. And I wouldn't have had the realizations and the fulfillment that I've had along the way. So there's really a huge value in these tools and in this system, because these 5 questions, as silly as they sound, as much as everybody's ego resists asking them, and I've seen it thousands of times, and I've seen it in myself, because my ego resists asking these questions too. Oh, it's so silly. I don't need to ask that. I know, like, these questions will bring up our sense of I know from the depth of our ego. And our ego will say, I already know that. I don't need to ask that question. I already know that. I know where I come from. I already know that. I know about my purpose. I don't need these questions. And yet we all need these questions. So speaking of questions, we're running close to our time here, and I've got a little more to talk about. Are there any questions about this? Okay, great. Kind of already talked about this, but I'll mention a few words here. So can't I just sit at home and get my own answers? Yes, of course. Kabbalah is about much more than that. If you think of an analogy of a library, there's great knowledge available in that library, in those books. But if you don't know that the library exists, you can't gain the knowledge within it. Once you discover it exists, you have to be a resident of that town. You have to move there and you have to get a library card. And the problem with accessing the wisdom of the tree of life in this library is that most people don't even know the answers to those questions. So they can't even figure out where the library is. And this is just like step one of one, like figuring out where the library actually is. Kind of to Danielle's question earlier about, well, what do you mean by the mind of God? It's like, well, the whole map, the whole blueprint, the whole library is the mind of God. So we have to get you oriented to it first. Like giving a person a set of codes. Think about if you wanted to rent a vacation home in rural Maine before the days of the internet, when you just had maps. That wasn't going to be so easy to just drive there if you didn't know the area. You'd have to get a bunch of maps. You'd have to know where you were. You'd have to really, you maybe have to stop and ask for directions. You know, you don't need to stop and ask for directions 99.9% of the time now, because all the codes of where everything is mapped out in your iPhone and your Google Maps or in Waze or Apple Maps. So it's kind of done for you. But the inner landscape of the tree of life is not like that. And in fact, the codes are all based on frequency, thought, emotion, and spiritual vibration. So in order to access the codes of the tree of life, like I meditated for 10 years every day, 2 to 3 hours a day before I found the mystery school. I didn't find a single code to enter the tree of life. Despite all that meditation, all the intuition, all the downloads, all the psychic abilities, at no point was I able to get into the tree of life without Kabbalah and without ascension directly, someone writing me a frequency-based letter of introduction and directly placing my energy into that sphere of the library that I needed to study in and holding it there for me for a month and then changing it for me to the next one and then changing it again and taking me on a journey that the soul knows exists, but is not obvious even with 10 years of meditation for hours a day, how to take yourself on that journey. Hopefully this analogies are all helpful and clear. So this is not anyone's fault. You know, there's an interesting series of 10 doorways here standing in front of this businessman, which are the 10 doorways of the tree of life. Human life is set up to prevent most people from ever taking the time to even ask if there is such a universal library, which contains all the answers and blueprints to everything. Kabbalah doesn't just say, oh yeah, there's a library, we heard of it once, but it moves you directly into that library, moves you directly into the hidden doorways, and establishes your residency in those 10 archetypal regions of the self that we call the spheres of the emanations of the tree of life. Emptiness is the original wisdom that leads to all other insight, growth, and progression. So to do Kabbalah, you must become empty. There are several poisons of the mind which can easily prevent us from becoming empty. The temptation number one here is, I will think about it. Temptation number two, I know it already. Temptation number three, I am already. Number four, I have already. Number five, life just is this way. Number six, I'm already good. I got it. I figured it out. When we have these poisons in our mind, we can't become empty. And this is many, 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 many people. The mind that already knows is like a pool of water that's sitting there stagnant. Already full, it doesn't accept new things. In this condition, all kinds of pathogenic organisms, which are our thoughts, breed until they take over and become the background noise that we get used to. A healthy mind is like a flowing river, always receiving new inputs and moving deliberately in its course to the ocean of the universal mind. To empty the stagnant mind and rejoin the river requires an act of faith and also an act of will. The river is unknown and is in motion. The ocean seems far away and even scarier. The river will dissolve into that ocean, and then what will happen? What will I even exist anymore? Once you have decided to empty your mind, you will need the real tools to do so. So That's a scary thought, right? I'm going to go on this river of universal consciousness, then I'm going to go into the ocean of consciousness, and then will I even exist anymore? And of course, the answer is yes. You will always exist. You have always existed. You've never been born and you can never die. The concept that you could dissolve and never exist again it's not possible. It's a false concept. It's not based in reality. So when you dissolve the river of individual consciousness into the ocean, it retains its individuality. It also is going to flow back through the cycle to the river, because the ocean is only one part and you can't stay in the ocean forever. The ocean in Kabbalah would be kept there at the crown, and you can only stay there for a split second, only for literally like a flash of an instant. And then you have to come back to your life, because you can't just go into the mind of God and dissolve and go away. That's not part of the purpose. The purpose is to be an individual here on earth while you are an individual here on earth. What happens after death? A little bit different, but while you're here on earth, you're supposed to be living as an individual. So you can't just cross into universal consciousness and go away. It's not a reality. You cross and you come back, and your life is remade through that. So the first tools to empty the mind are the path itself. Life activation, initiation, Kabbalah, Healer's Academy. We're surrounded by these thoughts in our minds, and we have to empty the mind so that we can begin. This is the journey. Some of you were asking about the dates earlier. Physical body, Malkuth, September 16th and 17th. Astral body and lower parts of the soul, all the way Yesod through Netzach, Hod, and Tiferet, January 13th. That's one day. The mental body and the higher parts of the soul in Geber and Hesed. That's March 30th, next year, of course. And then the coming home to ourselves, the final retreat, 3 days and 2 nights on site in North Andover, Massachusetts, at a retreat center. And that's the ascension of crossing the abyss into Bina, Hokmah, and Keter. That's July 12th, 13th, and 14th next summer. So this is a map here on the left of the tree, slightly differently laid out with sections off in different ways here, and with some slightly different symbolism. So any final questions on this? There's so much. I presented really heavily tonight on certain aspects of, the mind, God, DNA, tree of life. But everything in these presentations is just the most surface of scratching the surface, because even after 10 months of studying Kabbalah, you're going to be like, oh my God, I know nothing. It was so amazing. When can I do it again? This is the most amazing journey I've ever taken for myself. People say that every year, time and again, over and over again. This is one of the best things I've ever done for myself. And many people do the journey several times over a period of many years. But I've been studying this now since 2006. So it's been 17 years of Kabbalah in my life. And I've done it probably more than that. I've done it more than once a year because I'm a Kabbalah teacher and I was an apprentice for many years. So I've probably done it almost 20 times now. Probably done Kabbalah almost 20 times. And I still learn so much. There's so much that I don't understand about Kabbalah. And that's part of the beauty of lineage and how the mystery school works, is that we don't do it all ourselves. Like the lineage itself is working the tree of life with us. And so as a certified Kabbalah teacher, I have the immense honor and humble privilege to be able to ascend you into the tree of life and learn alongside of you, because I've been trained to be able to hold that energy. But I'm not done in my learning. Like Kabbalah is so many lifetimes of study. And even people who have studied, like the founder of the school who brought the school from the secret order in the English mystery school to public mystery school that we have had today for more than 25 years now, has been studying and teaching Kabbalah for 40 years. And he's like, I'm still at the beginning. This is an ongoing life study. So any final questions and thoughts?
Yes, this is
Yeah.
Laura.
Hey, Laura.
I'm sitting here and with my background of metaphysics and everything that I've done, boy, I have to empty out a lot of stuff. Do I do that in Malkuth?
We're going to do it at every level of the tree. We're going to do that as one of the
geez.
first meditations on the first weekend, with an empty
Okay.
your cup meditation and ritual, where you're actually going to physically charge a glass of water with all your opinions and thoughts and attachments, understandings, and misunderstandings or everything, and put it all into the cup. Then you're going to go outside and actually dump it into the earth and ask another guy to take it because I don't need it anymore. And then when you come
Perfect.
back in, you sit in the emptiness of the void and you allow the light to just fill you up. And we do that as Kabbalists with our rituals and with our meditation every day. And you can also use that ritual every day as a Kabbalist to physically charge up a cup of water with all your thoughts and then go dump it into the earth and let it go. That's a
Oh
very,
man,
very
I'll do that.
shamanic ritual, that's been done for thousands of years in many different traditions all over the world. It's not just unique to Kabbalah. Meditating with, the sun and the earth and visualizing light coming through you, like all the things that we teach in the mystery school about meditation, they're all about emptying out, because you can't really have a good meditation if your mind is filled with stuff. Even if the stuff in your mind is really important, really logical, really necessary for your life and really good, it's all going to just kick around in your mind. And eventually, if you don't empty it out, it just stagnates. And then it breeds, pathogens in the mind, which are negative thought loops that just take place. So we always need to do hygiene for our mind. And, so much of the mystery school tools, the first few levels of training, is about that self-care, like brushing your teeth mentally, cleaning out your mind every day, cleaning out your energy field every day, getting grounded, getting centered, having the tools of power to do that very quickly and very effectively.
Thank you. I better start now.
Awesome. I think you've already started. I have a sense because you're coming to meditations regularly online. So
Yes.
yeah, awesome. Anyone else? All right, wonderful. So we don't have time for a meditation tonight, but if you really want to do Kabbalistic meditations, if you go on my YouTube channel, most of you got the email link that I sent out. Sorry, not the email link, but the email invitation that was the original invite to this webinar. That has links to the last 3 webinars that I recorded, where there's meditations at the end of each of those webinars. 2 of them from last summer, 1 of them from August 9th. Those are all on my YouTube channel with direct links in that email that went out a couple of days ago. So if you go in there, you click on those, you can do those Kabbalah meditations and have a direct experience with the Tree of Life. So we won't go into the meditation aspect tonight. I'm going to end our recording here.